Even as a journalist who strives to learn about and break stories ahead of the pack, I am far more disgusted than proud to say that I was reporting on the impact of opiates on greater Boston communities before almost anyone else, and have been on the case for more than a decade now. In my earliest dispatches for DigBoston and later on the Boston Phoenix, I was horrified to meet entire families reeling from death and addiction, as well as neighborhoods on edge, while many public health officials and politicians ignored what was happening. All these years later, it's absolutely unbelievable what has become of this mess. Back in 2000, there were less than 400 opiate deaths statewide. In 2015, there were more than 1,500, or even more than 1,700, according to one state estimate. Last year, in 2016, that number shot up yet again, at least in the first 9 months for which the Department of Public Health has accounted. We have some harrowing and poignant clips to play for you today from some of our partners, each covering different aspects of treatment and addiction and the utter disaster that this ongoing crisis has caused in the Commonwealth. In my part, I would like to remind people that, while there are a number of factors in play, the opiate epidemic, much like climate change, is largely a man-made problem. Let me briefly explain. As I have reported many times, lawmakers in Massachusetts, like elsewhere, are swimming in pharmaceutical money. They have been for years. Even as the body count increases, for example, Purdue Pharma, the notorious manufacturer of OxyContin, spent $27,000 lobbying on Beacon Hill last year. This while the company's director, Jonathan Sackler, in one case contributed $1,000 to the campaign of Suffolk County Sheriff Steve Tompkins, as well as more than $10,000 to Bay State charter school advocates. There's an extremely long list of elected officials who have taken contributions from the manufacturers of dangerous pharmaceuticals. Yes, that list even includes a lot of politicians, like Governor Charlie Baker, who also claim they want to curb the epidemic. Meanwhile, as so many recent deaths from fentanyl have shown, this problem is a whole lot bigger than just Oxy, Percocet, and even old school junk in a bag, and very little is likely to change in the current climate. Left with few other options, the only real saviors are those who are helping to turn lives around one by one. This first clip about Prana Recovery Centers, which uses meditation and yoga to enhance the recovery process, shows what difficult and noble work these contemporary healers are doing. It was produced by Benjamin Zidell and first appeared on SCATV in Somerville.
I lived an entire lifetime looking at things through this foggy lens of, you're not good enough. You can't do that. You're not the kind of person who can do that. Other people do that stuff, not you. You drink, and you wallow in your own sadness and self-pity. A never-ending cycle that I became used to, and I thought was just never going to end until I died young. My real struggles with alcoholism began in my late teens, I would say, even though I had been drinking since a very young age, about 11 years old.
My alcoholism got to the point where it was starting to impact my life and my family's life, and it had transitioned from heavy drinking to alcoholism. June 17th, I believe it was, 2014, I went into detox rehab for the first time. It hasn't been a smooth, ideal road in terms of recovery, but that was my date for really taking hold of it and dealing with it.
It really didn't become a serious journey in recovery for me until I was in my 30s. That's when I realized that I wanted to do this for myself. There were reasons that I wanted to live and not have alcohol bog down the rest of my life.
You're going to meetings every day, you got a sponsor, you've got all the things that are laid out that you're supposed to be doing, but you picked up again. And that sort of hit home that it's not just one program that's going to work for me.
My experience with previous rehabilitation programs was a struggle for me. I was not invested. I just kind of yesed and nodded my head. When I found Prana, it was unlike any other program, and I had done everything.
The yoga classes were taught by a volunteer who was in recovery, and so the yoga was a recovery-based sort of stretching and balancing, and it wasn't a power workout yoga.
When I showed up, I didn't have an inkling of this is going to be something for me.
Meditation was new to me. My mind was always racing. I would always have a hard time sitting still.
I knew nothing except there was yoga involved, and I laughed.
Yoga to me was something that soccer moms did, and I never saw it for what it really is in terms of a spiritual, being aware of yourself and sort of your surroundings, connecting with yourself.
When I actually walked in the door, it was just click, instant connection. I was comfortable with everybody. I trusted everybody, and they allowed me to be honest about myself. I hold nothing back with these people.
For me, my recovery is different than anybody else's. Being able to recognize when it's time to pause, take a deep breath, relax, or sit with something.
These people aren't judging me. These people aren't mad at me. My disease sucks. But they realize that I'm not a jerk. I have a disease, and they don't hold that against me.
That's nothing I'd get from AA. That's nothing I'd get from recovery. That's nothing I'd get from an IOP. It's just something that is unique to Prana.
This is the gift that Prana has given to me. I'm able to go and live my life instead of working on my death.
With the practice of the yoga, the meditation, and the folks that I meet with at Prana, it just sort of centers me and reaffirms that I am where I need to be right now, and at least right now it's working.
The last time I got out of detox, I had my biggest moment of clarity, where I saw everything that I have wanted to do for the last decade of my life kind of flashing by me. And it was like I had two options. I can either continue to drink myself to death, or I can choose life. And for the first time, I realized all these things that were pipe dreams to me were things I could really accomplish. And I realized that my life was worth living.
What is possible now is anything.
I know that anything's possible. I can do anything. I don't see things as, I can't do that anymore.
Being able to think through things, being able to be present in my own life.
This program has just allowed me to live my life. It has taught me how to live my life. I would say that this program saved my life.
Our next guest is Charlestown native Johnny Hickey, whose 2010 movie, Oxymorons, gave some people, a lot of people, their first impression of the crisis Massachusetts has on its hands. Now in the middle of directing his second anti-drug film, the North Shore rave thriller Habit, we asked Johnny to come and speak with us about what he saw happening that so many of our state's alleged leaders missed. Johnny, thanks for coming.
What's going on? Always a pleasure, dude.
It's been a while.
Yes.
And of course, a lot of the stuff I spoke about in my introduction was you showing me a lot of that and bringing me to Charlestown, where you were raised. When you first approached me, it's 2005, I think. 2006.
Yeah, six.
About you were writing a movie about OxyContin, and I'd heard about it and I was familiar with what was happening, but from your level, what you were seeing was something all different altogether. So, what is that background? What did it look like?
I mean, I grew up in Charlestown, as you know, my background and stuff. And the neighborhood always had drugs and crime, and it's just one of those, seedy pots, the white collar, like blue collared, like white tough Irish neighborhoods, and heroin was always frowned upon as a kid. Like for me, like people didn't do heroin. It was like people in the bums in the park, old vets did it. It was a very low scale drug. You know, people did cocaine, people did their amounts of drugs, but it was never like anything where it was a crisis and you would hear of someone overdosing or dying. Very rare, anything of that sort ever, except for like maybe crazy townies smoking angel dust and doing something horrible. You know, in my late adolescence, you know, dibbling and dabbling with like rave drugs, and where I went with like my life of like, you know, crime and being a knucklehead, I watched a shift of, you know, this pill come in, OxyContin at the time, and just, I don't think anybody else realized what maybe the way I was seeing it so fast, because we were doing E and we were doing all this like stuff and having fun, but I'd watched this one pill come in and I just watched everybody start doing it. So like the rave crowd, it's like, yeah, ravers do Molly, ravers do Special K, and you know, hippies smoke weed. You know, everyone. But this thing was something that I seen go from like the streets to like someone's mother. Like people that just don't do drugs were doing drugs, and then not only were they doing drugs, but they were doing horrible things to get the drug, and they were dying. And it happened so fast, where I had to sit back sometimes and look at the big picture and be like, what is going on here?
What year do you really peg as that balloon? Where it started
2001 is when I noticed it, for sure. That's when I seen, you see, I was incarcerated for other stuff, and that's when I seen the shift was actually in jail, is when the typical inmate and the inmate that was in jail for whatever they were doing now became, that inmate slowly like weeded itself out, like someone like myself, and became opiate addicts, opiate-related crime, you know what I mean? And people come, and I'd never before seen people sick. I've never seen someone, you know, oh, I didn't, you know, do ecstasy this weekend, I didn't smoke weed, I'm dying on the floor. And I would, you know, all these people would be quarantined in amount of cells and areas, you know, puking on themselves. And so I seen this stuff as like, you know, almost like a horror at that point.
Now, at the same time, you're not seeing this reflected in the media. People aren't really talking about it outside of your circles. You wanted to make a movie, and you know, I wish we could talk all day about the making of Oxymorons. I know it was an adventure in and of itself, but what has been the impact of that, and what was the intention when people see that film?
I mean, when I made Oxymorons, it was, you know, it was part of me always wanted to live my dream as a filmmaker and that stuff, and the things in life that deter you from, you know, living your dream, which segues many people to drugs, because it's the give-up point. It's like, I'm just gonna work a 9 to 5, I'm not gonna follow and do what I always wanted to do as a kid, and I'm gonna come home and I'm gonna get high, or I'm gonna drink, but whatever the vice is, you know what I mean? But opiates, more than anything, destroyed people, you know, took away more than handfuls of people that I love, but not just like, oh, I know this dude, he was my family members, real close friends, and I said, there's nobody touching this, like there's nobody talking about this, so this needs to be the first thing I step up to the plate with and make a movie about gritty indie, you know, my original idea to do it with like handy cam, run around the projects, that grew into something much bigger, obviously. And I got the message out, and, you know, I got, you know, documentary TV stations, and it was a big topic, and there was almost a point where we thought, this might be making a huge difference. And I have thousands of testimonials that I'm grateful for.
Still to this day.
Today, there's people that see my movie today, you know, 5-6 years later, how did I never hear about this? And for me, it's like, I can't be like, well, everyone should be pumping my movie because it sounds like I'm just trying to pump my movie. And it's like, no, really, this thing has like thousands of people that don't know me. Some Marine that was hooked on Perk 30s tattooed my quote on his ribcage. I never met this dude. My movie changed his life that much that it's on his. Yeah. So stuff like my film or anything that's like actually maybe a creative way or an alternative to like their ways of like fixing the problem that is worse and not fixed, they need to, you know, open the doors on.
So I know you're working with us at the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism. Program's called Fight. We're going to be, you know, you're working with people in recovery to make films and to do some documentary work and to show what's going on. And not part of that project, but just what you're doing now is you work with other people in recovery on your crew and everything. But tell us about your new movie. It's also drug related, not opiates necessarily. But
yeah, I mean. And at the end of the day, the new movie Habit is the working title that we're working with right now, Habit Hill. Habit, the drug could be anything. It could be black tar heroin. It could be a bad batch of MDMA. It takes place in that, you know, that realm of like EDM music and trippy stuff, just because it's basically it's the purgatory of where does someone go when they overdose on drugs. You know what I mean? So it could be any drug that a viewer could take home with it. And if that can help an opiate abuser next to someone who is going to do a bad batch of Molly at a festival, whatever it may be, you can, kind of label that yourself as a viewer, but it's more of like the torture of like something gone wrong to do with these drugs that are out there and where these people go. It's a much darker vision of what happens, and it's always like my creative scared straight thing that I do, like with oxymorons. I always said if someone watches that and never touches an opiate because they don't want to live that lifestyle, great, and that worked with many people. So if some kids can watch this and take home with them, I don't want to go near this stuff, you know what I mean? I don't want to end up in that world and that horror. I go very over the top on the darkness of what it really is, and people need to like sit there and be touched by that to kind of maybe want to fix a problem or, prevent it in a matter.
That's great, man. Where can people follow you? Pick up on oxymorons and everything like that.
Just do at the Johnny Hickey, everywhere in social media. Oxymorons you can find on Amazon Prime now is where it's mainly housed for viewership. And yeah, just follow me and you can catch up on the habit stuff, everything we're doing with you guys. Working with, there are some success stories too. There's a few people I'm working with that I met through oxymorons that are working in media and like have like great and they're former opiate addicts. These are people that no one would have ever seen being where they are today, much like myself. So there is like a silver lining to some of it. It just needs to be more of that stuff to push it through. So
that's great, man. Well, thanks for coming out.
Absolutely, anytime.
All right. Even with so much bad news out there, people like Johnny have risen to the occasion, helped against the odds. Here's a clip from Cambridge Community Television, the host of this month's episode of Beyond Boston, about how lives are being saved, in part thanks to volunteers at Cambridge Overcomes Addiction. Piggybacking that report, we have a video from Malden Access TV with an important message for addressing the problem among us.
Hi, my name is Pat, and I would like to say that I am the founder of Cambridge Overcomes Addiction, and I've been doing this now for the last 3 years, and I've had 3 vigils. And the vigil to me is very important because I've lost my daughter, and she was 20 years into heroin addiction. And it's a very personal thing for me because Cambridge needs to realize that this is a very, very epidemic in our city. And hopefully with everyone included, we'll be able to stop this in our city or at least try to curb it somehow. And I also wanted to say that I also do a Naranon group, which I've been doing for 20 years now. And it's for families who are struggling with their loved ones who are addicts.
Now, there's a lot of talk about Central Square, the problems, which I would say are i.e.
Right.
drug addicts and drug. You also live in Central Square.
Yes.
How do you feel about Central Square?
I mean, I think it's sad. I honestly do. I think it's sad that they see them as some kind of like a rodent. We got to get rid of the rodents. If you don't have it in your family, addiction,
Right.
you have no clue what it's like. Nobody understands it until you actually live it.
My brother suffers from the disease of addiction and has no idea how much we love him.
As a high school coach and recreation coordinator, I've lost some players due to the disease of addiction. These were talented kids with bright futures who were taken from us much too soon.
I have family members who suffer from the disease of addiction, and it has had a huge impact on my life.
This is my son, Michael. He died of this disease. There's not a day that goes by that we don't miss him.
I'm 20 years in recovery, and I've dedicated my life to helping others.
My name's Jimmy. I have 6.5 months clean, and my life's a miracle, and recovery is a beautiful thing.
My best friend is battling the disease of addiction and just got out of rehab.
My husband has 12 years in recovery, and I couldn't be more proud.
2 years ago, a family member of mine was sent to prison due to the disease of addiction, and that made me angry.
I witnessed somebody overdose and die at my former job, and it's something I'll never forget.
I have 2 years in recovery. My father wasn't so lucky. I lost him to the disease of addiction when I was 16.
My son was born addicted to heroin, and he's the best thing that ever happened to me.
Addiction is not a choice. Addiction is a disease. Throughout my career at Malden High School, I have seen many young people die tragically. Car accidents, lifelong illnesses, and overdoses due to addiction. No one of these lives is more important than the other. Malden, stop the stigma.
Finally, here's BINJ Network Director Jason Pramas taking us out with some of the ugly history behind the opiate crisis, followed by a clip of Matt the Poet Gainham, a vocal artist in recovery himself, telling his story in a performance in Malden.
The opioid crisis is dire enough without adding insult to injury. With over 12,000 deaths from overdoses in Massachusetts since the year 2000, increasing sharply in recent years with fentanyl-laced heroin hitting the streets, the human cost to users, their families, and our communities is already tremendous. But thanks to mandatory minimum sentencing for drug-related criminal offenses, that cost is far higher than it needs to be. A bit of history is in order. Decades back, sentencing people for such offenses was left to individual judges, who could then lower or remove jail time or order an alternative sentence to a drug treatment facility for nonviolent offenders convicted of simple possession and the like. The passage of the Controlled Substances Penalties Amendments Act by Congress in 1984, followed by a number of related laws on the federal and state level, took that power away from the courts and set mandatory minimum sentences that could not be modified by judges. Prisons around the country began to fill with drug offenders, and many nonviolent offenders ended up doing more time than violent offenders like members of major drug cartels. Worse still, racism was baked into the new system, with drugs like the crack form of cocaine sold in poorer communities of color drawing far longer sentences than drugs like the powder cocaine sold in wealthier white communities. The arrest rate for people of color has remained consistently higher as well. According to the State Sentencing Commission, Massachusetts imprisons black defendants 8 times more than white defendants. Latino defendants are sent up almost 5 times more. Then, in 1996, OxyContin, a synthetic opiate pain medication, came on the market in 80 milligram pill form. It was developed by a small Connecticut pharmaceutical company called Purdue Pharma, an early pioneer not in synthesizing oxycodone, the active ingredient in OxyContin, which had originally been developed in Germany in 1916, but in something more insidious, the direct marketing of drugs to doctors. According to The Week magazine, Purdue doubled its sales staff in the first 4 years of the OxyContin rollout. That staff developed a database that identified doctors who prescribed pain medication more heavily than others. They focused their sales effort on those doctors, encouraging them to overprescribe the medication for a wide variety of conditions. In 2000, the company released a 160 milligram pill specifically aimed at users that had developed tolerance to opioids, which became the wildly popular street drug we know today. Crushed and sniffed by tens of thousands of users in the Bay State alone. And so by 2010, OxyContin accounted for over 1/3 of American painkiller sales. Most of you know the rest of the story. The legions of newly addicted oxy users eventually ran out of prescriptions and turned to whatever they could get to replace it, inevitably leading many of them to heroin. A sane government would have stepped in early on in this process, shut a company like Purdue down, and significantly expanded public funding for solid treatment and recovery facilities for the drug's many casualties. But that's not what happened. Instead, Purdue was making over $3 billion a year on OxyContin by 2010 and had a lock on legal sales of the drug until its patent expired in 2013, even as public funding for treatment got cut. Meanwhile, street sales of Oxy and the resulting spike in heroin sales led to a whole new wave of nonviolent offenders sent to prison for years with mandatory minimum sentences. Unfortunately, action to reform such strict sentencing laws has been slow to come at the federal level and here in the Commonwealth. With the new session of the state legislature just beginning, there are no new reform bills to recommend, but it's reasonable to expect the main reform bill of the last session, an act to repeal mandatory minimum sentencing laws for drug offenses, will be reintroduced this time around. The bill would repeal all mandatory minimums for drug offenses and let courts impose sentences that fit the crimes. It's ironic that, according to WBUR, quote, several other states, including conservative states, have overhauled their sentencing laws and, quote, while ostensibly progressive Massachusetts lags behind. But thanks to the work of grassroots organizations like the Mass Organization for Addiction Recovery and Families Against Mandatory Minimums, high-level officials like Mass Senate President Stanley Rosenberg and Chief Justice Ralph Gantz of the Mass Supreme Judicial Court have recently gone on record in support of mandatory minimum reform. That's great, But without voters across Massachusetts putting pressure on your state legislators, it could still be years before the needed reform finally passes. So the best thing that viewers can do to help stop this devastating outgrowth of the already tragic opioid crisis is to watch for the new mandatory minimum reform bill and join advocates in your community to demand that your state reps and senators do the right thing and pass it. For Beyond Boston, I'm Jason Pramas.
I'm the surface of a sleepless ocean. The cold depths of frozen emotion. I'm pieces of a heartbroken flown inside of love that was stolen. I'm written poetry spoken. I'm a fresh page with a mind full of things to say, reminiscing on yesterday's best days to get the stress away. Even if I'm depressed today, I'm that feeling inside when you look your lover in the eyes that no other person alive could provide. I'm the sun setting on a crimson sky. I'm trapped inside these speakers, turning naysayers into believers. When the poem gets deeper, I'm the teacher, abusing the fact that I have the platform to reach you. I'm lost in the wind, a breeze that will never come across you again. Brought up in Boston, boxing the problems coming up for the bottom where rise is the only option. I'm the beautiful ugly, a recovering junkie, making barely enough money to keep a roof over me and my son that loves me, and I refuse to let him go hungry because my past has come back to crush me. I'm that first breath of freedom. Breathe in 1,000 reasons, leaving a cell block of demons screaming freedom like you just left work for the weekend. Only the work week lasted for 5 years. Borrowed time will make you see clear as you watch your youth disappear. You learn the truth when you're in here. Only your true friends will be there when you breathe free air. I'm the rebirth of Pac Poe and Shakespeare. I'm the rose that grew from concrete, the thump beneath the street where Romeo and Juliet would meet. I'm the madness created from the telltale heartbeat. I'm Achilles at war, but my pen is my sword, using the allure of everything I went through before as a metaphor that you don't have to struggle anymore. I'm that morning light, after making it through a night that might have taken your life when there was nothing but darkness in sight. But you found the strength to fight, because the sun shines bright once you believe everything will be alright. I'm the last words that a poet writes. I'm the skies telling the story of my past that remind me of what I'll see when I'm looking back. Similes didn't have an impact on half of that, so I literally mapped out the path from where I was at. I'm chaos finding serenity, the point beyond infinity, taking what's given to me so I can build from within my city. I even pray for my enemies, because once upon a time they were a friend to me, regardless if they see it differently. I'm trying to make history. I'm a legend, or so I've been told by my friends that made it to heaven. As a penman, I'm the extension of their resurrection, redemption. If anyone abusing prescription medicine whose progression led them to heroin, let that settle in. I'm the voice of a generation, raising my voice to the nation. Inspiration for every addict getting high in the basement, or kid trying to get clean as a detox patient, that they can say, I am one of the ones that made it. I'm hope for those that lost it, still carrying pieces of broken dreams in their pocket. Who think happiness is found in material objects? I'm street knowledge. I'm passion, pleasure, and pain. I'm lightning, thunder, and rain. I'm what my mother made on the first day of May. I'm a heroin addict that changed, but couldn't wash away the stains that covered my veins. I'm Matthew Gannum, and you will remember the name